Hello gang, Shapeshot21 here. We are back on Mania this time. We are going to be replacing the seals on the oil filter housing as well as on the oil cooler, which is part of the oil filter housing, so it gets a little bit messy. There's like 3 pieces here. The top bit, or the outsidemost bit with the fins on it, that's the heat exchanger for the oil to coolant. And then behind it are some more seals and O-rings that hold the whole assembly onto the block. There are several bolts, I believe, that are 8mm and maybe some E-type Torx. I don't remember off the top of my head, and the audio for this is also screwy. In addition to that, we'll be replacing the turbo oil lines, the feed and return. The feed comes off of the block there, and the return goes into the oil filter housing, I think. I might have that reversed. But it is worth doing if you've got the car this far apart. They can be done with the engine in the car, but it is tight and it is a pain. But first off, let's get these bolts cracked and start pulling the oil filter housing off. And yes, magnetic trays are your friend. These bolts, if memory serves, are all different length. So I try to orientate the tray one way and then put bolts in approximate locations as to how I pulled them out of the tray. Just a little trick that makes it so you can at least get everything all about in the same hole where it came out of. Generally good, that way you don't break anything. Careful when you do pull this off. There may still be oil and coolant inside it. I do find out that there's still coolant in the heat exchanger. It's not much, but it is still a fair bit. So you get those undone. There might be one more hidden one. I don't like to refund things a lot. Yeah, there's one down there. You gotta look around. There's all sorts of hidden fasteners on this thing. Again, you can do all of this with it in the car. It helps to put the front clip in service position, which is not hard to do. It is just kind of a bit of a pain, but that gives you enough clearance to get in here and do this. But if you've got the engine out this far, just do the seals. Easier to do them now than it is to fight it later. Okay, that is the old turbo oil line. It's just held on by a spring clamp. That's going right in the trash bin. But might as well take that off now. So I think, yep, there's a fastener hidden behind that. And as soon as that comes off, I think that's the last one. Maybe there's one more. Yeah. Yeah, one more up top. And then this should come off, I think. These seal kits are not terribly expensive, and they are a known failure point on these engines. Just something to think about. If you're getting up there in mileage, 80 to 100,000, might want to think about swapping it out. Because if these seals go bad, you'll get oil in your coolant or coolant in your oil, depending on which side breaks through. If you get too much oil in your coolant, read any, then your coolant is bad. If you get too much coolant in your oil, also read any, then your oil is bad. And if your oil is bad, it doesn't lubricate your bearings, doesn't lubricate your pistons, doesn't lubricate your cams correctly, and you end up destroying your engine. That's not something you want. So if you can do this, do it. If you're not sure if it's been done, and you do all your mini service at a dealer, they can look it up. If you do your mini service at a independent shop, Unless they keep really good records, I probably won't. Best not chance it. Go to ECS Tuning or Amazon or Rock Auto. Buy the parts. Spend probably a day when you do your next oil change. Drain the oil. Pull the front clip into service position. Get in there. Pull this off. Clean it. Put it back. You will probably need to pull it off from the bottom, because when this is in the car, the turbo is in the way. While you're in there, you might want to replace the turbo lines too. The hard line for the turbo can go bad, as well as the return. The return line definitely can go bad. I'm just cleaning this up here with a little brake clean on a paper towel. And all that is doing is brake clean is just acetone in a can. The red stuff is chlorinated. The green stuff is not. The green stuff actually works fairly well. We've switched over to the green stuff here. The other nice thing with the green stuff is you can clean parts you're going to weld with it. With the red stuff, you can't, because when you use a TIG welder or a MIG welder or any type of electric arc welder on the red stuff, it makes basically mustard gas, and you end up poisoning yourself with it. So don't use the red stuff. If you're going to weld on it, use the green stuff. Little gasket scraper to remove some of the remaining residue. So I'm just pointing out that certain passages are coolant, certain passages are oil. And again, the oil passages need to stay oil passages, and the coolant ones need to stay coolant. And the way they do it is just so weird that they like weave the coolant passages through the oil passages right here. That's not helpful for keeping them separate, but what are you going to do? The engine's designed, you're not going to fix it. One thing I do want to point out, if you look down at the flywheel there's that metal stick hanging straight down. That is the flywheel positioning tool for the timing set. Leave that in there until everything is torqued down, until everything is tight. Once you take the engine out and you've got that in there, just leave it. Now that piece that I took off was the old high pressure oil feed line to the turbo, and that little washer is one of the washers for the banjo bolt. I bought an upgraded repair kit that uses a braided steel line with some thread-on banjo bolts, or banjo fittings, new banjo bolts, and washers. Every banjo fitting gets 2 washers, one on each side. Something to keep in mind. If you get a new oil line, make sure you get new banjo bolts as well. I actually damaged one of mine, or didn't get one, and had to order a packet. They're not expensive. They have to go on there, otherwise it does not seal. Also, when you're replacing these seals, you gotta clean out the seal channels on the oil filter housing side. It's a little tedious. Get in there, clean them out. You will thank yourself. This whole process is a preventative maintenance item that's going to save you massive amounts of trouble further down the line. So take the time, spend the money, have it done, or do it yourself. It is not that hard. It takes time. Time is your friend. If you've got a boatload of tools and a boatload of time, take the time. Okay, that's splitting the intercooler piece, or the heat exchanger piece, off of it. And that hose that's still attached is for the cooling side. That goes into the coolant system. Again, clean off the surfaces, clean off the surfaces. There are little gaskets in there as well. If you get the whole kit, it will have everything you need. Do not be afraid to take this stuff apart. It's just bolts. Comes apart, it goes back together. Now I'm trying to get some of the shmoo off of that coolant gallery there. I don't get it all. When we get this thing back together, I do end up doing a coolant system flush on it, and that helps things significantly. Especially because this stuff was run on green coolant. These engines should never be run on green coolant. They need to be run on BMW spec blue coolant. No, you don't have to go to the dealership to get it there. You can buy it at the auto parts stores now. I keep different coolant for each vehicle that runs a specialty coolant. Right now it's only this and the 318. I do have a little pick in here just so that I can get the old seals out, because they do get kind of stuck in the channels for them. So you will need a mechanics pick set. Icon makes a really nice one. So if you got a Harbor Freight, go get the Icon picks. They're sharp, they're durable. But the other thing is, picks are expendable. If you damage them, it's going to happen. Just get new ones. Don't think about it, don't worry about it. And again, get in there with a paper towel and some brake clean. Make sure those channels are clean. If they're not clean and the gaskets don't seal correctly, this whole thing is for naught, and you just created the problem you were in there trying to avoid. And then once you do have it clean, make sure you put the seal in there before you put it back on. Otherwise you're just going to spray coolant and oil everywhere. So we'll dig around in there a little bit more, and we'll get through. No, see, more brake clean. You want it as clean as you can get it. You don't want any nicks or burrs along the edges if you can avoid it. If one does show up, take a very small file and very gently remove it. Don't go crazy. But if there's burr, just gently take it off. We had to do that with one of the cam journals because it got nicked when we were pulling the valves. Not ideal, but we fixed it. It's not affecting performance. It's not damaging the engine. You just gotta be gentle with these things. Let's see, here I'm scraping out some stuff that's stuck in a seal channel or inside one of the oil gallery holes there, or coolant gallery. Because if there's any built-up stuff, you want to get rid of that as well. Nothing is going to be harmed by pulling that out, and in fact it may save the engine depending on what side of the filter this is on. I don't know what side of the filter it's on, so I was just pulling it out. And that's just more inspecting and checking. So hopefully, okay, yeah, and you can see where the gaskets go in those grooves on both sides. Spotless is good. I was trying to go for spotless. You don't always have to get it, but the cleaner the better. The other nice thing, at least the thing I like with these cars, is you can get to the oil filter from the top and you can get to it while it's hot. I've been doing all of my oil changes from the top on this car recently, and we'll get into that in one of the mini maintenance videos coming up in a little bit. As soon as this series is done, we'll get into those. Now we'll get the seals back in, press them into their channels, make sure they stick. Normally you'd put something on them. I did not want to put anything on these just in case I guessed wrong and got a water-based lubricant on the oil side or an oil-based lubricant on the coolant passage side. Dry is okay. It's not ideal, but it's okay. And now I'm putting the screws that hold the filter housing side onto the block, and then we get the last set of gaskets on and get the heat exchanger side on. Once that is done, then we will get into the return and feed line for the turbo and mounting the turbo. Clean the threads out. That's also important. That's what I'm doing right here. Just cleaning the threads out on the bolts. If they're gunked up, if they've got shmoo in them, if they just look a little dirty, thumbnail in a paper towel and run the screw in or out with your thumbnail in the threads, and that will pull out most of the stuff, and that's usually good enough. There are two different seal kits for this pump. One's for the front side, one is for the back side. If you're going to go in, get them both. You might as well replace them both if you're already in there. So this is the coolant housing, or the heat exchanger seal kit. The other one is the filter housing seal kit. And then there's no real indexing pins, and yep, still some oil in there, depending on how you hold it. So just be careful, be aware. Everything's dry. Pick the seal up off the floor, and then we will see about getting things where they're supposed to be. Again, you don't have to go nuts, but everything does need to be clean. Cleanliness is king when doing something like this. And it's not going to hurt you. So, and again, there's no indexing pins, locking pins, alignment dowels. Nothing. I think there was still a little more oil in there. Yep, it's dripping on me. So that's okay. Just be prepared for that. There's lots of little tiny nooks and crannies in there. It's a heat exchanger. That's how they're designed. You're never gonna get it all out of there unless you soak it, which I don't recommend you doing, but that's the only way it's all going to come out. So the trick is just get it as dry as you can and start assembling it as fast as you can. So if you can get it assembled and tight, not torqued, but tight. There is a torque spec for all of this. Check your manual, which I'll have to do here in a few. But if you can get it all tight and fairly evenly tight on all the bolts, it's not going to leak. That'll hold it until you can get the torque spec and a torque wrench to do this. I believe it's in inch-pounds. It's not very heavy. I go get the little torque wrench. But I am using, I want to say that's a 3/8 drive ratchet for this whole thing. but I'm just doing it by hand right now, as you can see. Yeah, you can get some torque on those, but it's not a whole lot of torque. And again, the more important thing is that it's even. And here we go, getting the filter housing tight to the block as well. Again, important preventative maintenance, and easy enough to do whilst the engine is out. And here we go. Off to pull out the Bentley manual and clean up first, then the Bentley manual, because my hands are covered in oil. So we'll do that, and then we get to the Bentley manual. Again, I don't remember what the torque spec is. I want to say it's like 22 inch-pounds. Don't quote me on that. But that's probably what is required for this. Okay, not sure what I'm doing. Probably something about... have to go get the torque spec. Here's the bolts. Here's those bolts. And then... yep. Okay. Now we go get the torque wrench. And we will gently torque these down to where they're supposed to be. Then it's time for doing the oil feed lines and return line for the turbo. And that's another one of those maintenance things. Those swivel fittings go bad on the feed line. It's the high pressure side of the system. You might as well replace it if you're in this far. The return is more just kind of a drop tube, but it's under the turbo in a really hot place in the engine. It comes coated in insulation. You might as well replace it when it gets replaced. Okay. So, 1/4 inch drive torque wrench. And the thing with these is you just go gentle. You don't have to grunt on these. And you slowly creep up on it. You don't snap it, like I've seen some people do, because then your torque is inconsistent. You continuous even pressure, and then when the wrist on the torque wrench snaps, just like that, it's time to stop. Once you feel it give and it cams over, stop pulling. Back off. Move on to the next fastener. Now, I like to bring stuff up in stages. To me, it just makes sure that things seat evenly. Okay, and here we go for other ones, which appear to actually be Allen heads, which doesn't surprise me. And again, just nice and even. Run them in with your fingers if you can. And then once you start to feel it take up torque, pull at the outside, at the end of the handle. Use your hand on the head to keep it steady so it doesn't rip off the head of the fastener. And keep an open palm on the other side and just gently but firmly keep pulling it to you until the head snaps, or the wrist snaps. Once it snaps, again, stop pulling and don't jerk it. Nice, constant, even pressure. And you always, always, always store your torque wrench with the tension off of the spring. If it's a click type torque wrench, you never store it with the spring tensioned. That will damage it and it will make it inaccurate when it reads. If you need your torque wrench to be accurate, you cannot store it with a setting on it. it has to be completely torqued or completely backed off. I'll do a whole video on torque wrenches if you guys want me to. Torque wrenches, torque screwdrivers, electronic, digital, torque angle gauges, the whole nine. Okay, here is the turbo oil kit. It is both the feed and the return line, 2 banjo bolts, or 2 banjo fittings with new washers. You use the original banjo bolts, both from the turbo and from the block. It is a very nice braided stainless line, and it is an OEM return line. It comes with a clamp already on the constant tension side of the holder on the constant tension clamp, so all you have to do is slide it down over the hose barb, and that's one of the banjo washers. Again, it's one on either side of the banjo fitting. That way it will seal correctly. Make sure the banjo bolt is clean. I like to put if the banjo washer was just a regular washer, I'd put the upside next to the banjo bolt, or the banjo fitting, before I run it in. And that leaves the tail side farther away. Now there are 2 different ends on this hose. One is a 90, one is a 45. The 90-degree one goes down on the banjo fitting that goes into the block. The 45 goes up on the banjo fitting that goes into the turbo. This is so you can properly align the banjo fitting on the block for everything to clear. Now, one thing I did not do, which I should have done, is the oil feed return line has an O-ring on it. The O-ring is very, very tight. Take a little oil and smother it around the top of the return tube. Make sure you get it on the O-ring. I end up screwing up the O-ring and have to replace it. Luckily, I have replacements. Not everyone will. I replaced it with a Viton O-ring. They're pretty much indestructible in terms of heat and chemicals. So that's fine in the environment that it's in. What I'm doing right now is I'm actually going to get the manifold, I think. No, I'm getting set up for the gasket. So this is as soon as we stop moving here, this is the MLS gasket for the exhaust manifold. And that rattle can that I just picked up is copper gasket tack in a spray can. Now, what that is for is to ensure that your gaskets make good contact and stick to each other. It'll kind of flow into any of the imperfections on the block or the manifold that the gasket can't quite get into, especially because this is an MLS or a multi-layered steel gasket. These are really nice gaskets, but they do have some downsides. The main one being they don't form fit as nicely as a paper gasket does. That's okay. That's what gasket tack is for. Or this spray gasket. And just some light shots of it. It's very tacky stuff. You want it kind of even. Let it set, let it tack. And then I think I do the other side here shortly. This is copper anti-seize. I've talked about this in the past. Super helpful stuff. Super useful stuff. I use the copper stuff, I think, on the head bolts here. I might use the nickel, or not the head bolts, the manifold bolts. I might use the nickel, but I don't remember. The nickel is expensive, but it is rated for much higher temperatures. I'm just using the brake clean to get off any of the overspray here. Just because it will tack up all sorts of stuff. Probably a little OCD on my part, but hey, it's my car. Once we get this all set up and ready to go, yeah, we're going to spray the inside too. And then time to get this on the car, which it just will drop down on the studs. The studs are already there. Okay, I do pull that back off, which is why I didn't take the tension clamp off of the spring yet. Just because I wasn't sure if this needed to go on first. Now we push this down. Don't take that clamp off until everything is in position. You can take the cap off, and this is when you should oil that snout and O-ring so it slips into the turbo. It will go in if you don't, but I did screw up the O-ring. Had to take it off and put a new O-ring on. Again, not the end of the world, but if you can avoid doing it, I'd avoid doing it. Now this is a little tricky. You gotta make sure all of the studs line up for the turbo and the support bracket. And then it goes on. Now see where they oil feed, or the return goes in. There should be a little bolt there. I'd had it taken out. You have to wind the feed line up the back, and there is a second banjo that comes in the bag. Thread that on, run your bolt with your 2 banjo washers through, and that goes up top. The return goes on the bottom, and this is a spreader plate for even application of force holding the exhaust manifold on. There are a few of them. Each one is differently shaped. They'll only go on one place. And okay, I am using the copper for this. I prefer the copper stuff. Dad likes the aluminum stuff. As long as you're putting some type of never sees on, it helps your odds of getting things back apart. I don't care where in the country you live. It is not a bad idea. Yes, I know some people hate looking like a Tin Man. All I have to say to that is embrace the Tin Man. If you're covered in Tin Man, your odds of getting the bolt or the nut back off the car after it has been heat cycled a million times, or especially if you live up north or in the northeast, you will be able to get bolts back out. It makes life so much easier working on cars that are in the salt zones, that are in the rust belts. It is your friend. Use the... Yes, it gets everywhere. That's okay. That's what that giant tub of orange goo that you have in your shop bathroom is for. If you don't have any orange goo, stuff is amazing. Orange Glow, or even the knockoff stuff, is incredible to have. You want it, it's going to do you good. I don't get the banjo for the feed on, and I don't get the return in. I do that off camera. But you get the general idea of how this goes back together. It is not anything that is going to cause you significant problems. You can do it. This is the first car I've gone this deep into, and I did it. Just gotta be careful and methodical with how you do things. So, this is SharpShot21. Thanks for tuning in. Hope this was helpful. If you got comments, drop them down below or over in the Discord, and I will see you guys next time. Sharps out. 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 Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. It really helps me out, and it lets you know when I put something new up. New videos will be going up on Tuesdays or Thursdays at 8 a.m. Eastern. And if I do decide to do live streams, I will try to give 24 hours notice. So hit the subscribe button on the channel, and you'll be notified when I post that stuff too. Hope to see you next time. Sharps out.